you can see a map. It is a satellite map of Moscow. And here you can see Moscow Kremlin and Red Square, the center of the city. And 10 kilometers to the south, on the right bank of Moscow River, you can see this huge green zone. It's our museum reserve, Kolomenskoye. It became a part of Moscow just in the middle of the 20th century. And before that, that territory was a suburban area of Moscow. Here were several villages. The biggest of them was Kolomenskoye. In the Middle Ages, that was, of course, not a part of Moscow. That was a very pleasant place in suburban area. Just imagine, I will show you a view of a landscape here. You can see modern Moscow, and just imagine that in the Middle Ages there were no any block of flats, there were no forests on that left bank and on this right bank of Moscow River, and here were only great open fields. Kolomenskoye was a perfect place for falconry. Falconry hunting was the main entertainment for our Russian sovereigns in Middle Ages. That's why this place was liked very much by our Moscow princes, and great prince of Moscow, Basil III, ordered to build here his summer palace. That was first palace which was built in Kolomenskoye. It was built here in this ground marked by two cannons. That was in the beginning of the 16th century. And near his palace, Basil III ordered to build this church, the Church of Ascension, our main monument of our museum reserve. It was built by Italian architect, by Pietro I. That's why we can see here a mix of different styles: Italian Renaissance, European Gothic, and our traditional Russian style. That church, for practically 500 years, it is standing on a declivity of the Kolomenskoye hill, had never been rebuilt. It preserved till nowadays without any great changes. That's why it is a UNESCO monument today, a monument from the list of World Heritage of UNESCO. And here in this church attended worships not only Basil III, but many other Russian czars. For example, the son of Basil III, our first Russian Tsar, Ivan the Terrible. He also visited Kolomenskoye. He liked this place very much. But the splendor of Kolomenskoye was later, not in the times of Ivan the Terrible, but in the 17th century, in the middle of the 17th century, after the time of troubles, when the Russian throne was attended by different impostors, and when we have a very hard period of Polish intervention in Russia, our throne attended new dynasty of Russian Tsars, Romanov dynasty. They built here at first small wooden palace, and later the second Tsar of Romanov dynasty, the Tsar Alexei Mihайлович, who ruled in the second half of the 17th century, ordered to build here a great Tsar's courtyard. Now, here you can see the front gates of that Tsar's courtyard, and on the place of these trees, there were a great wooden palace, one of the biggest palaces in our country. Today, we have a copy of this palace in our museum. And the original palace existed in Kolomenskoye for practically 100 years. Here we can see this great wooden palace, which consisted of 26 wooden towers, 270 rooms, and it had practically 3,000 of windows. The square of this palace was more than 1 hectare, and it was, I suppose, the biggest palace of the pre-Petrine epoch in Russia. It was completely built out of wood. In this palace, Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich and his family liked to spend their summertime, because Kolomenskoye was the summer residence of our Russian Tsar. Now let's speak about Tsar Alexei. Who was he? So here you can see a portrait of Tsar Alexis. He ruled our country from 1645 till 1676 for 31 years. He ruled our country. He was married twice. His first wife was Maria Miloslavskaya. She lived in a happy marriage with Tsar Alexis for 20 years. She gave a birth for 13 children in Tsar's family, to 8 girls and 5 boys. But after 10 years of that marriage, while giving birth of a 13th child, she died. She died, and for 2 years, Tsar Alexis lived alone, because, of course, he was a real Christian. He was Orthodox Christian. He could have only one wife, but his wife died. She died, and that's why he married. 2 years after, he married again. His second wife became Natalia Naryshkina. She gave a birth to 3 kids. So all in all, our Tsar Alexis had 16 children. He had very big family. That's why this palace is also very, very big. It consisted of 2 halves: man's half, male half, which we can see here, and female half, which was behind this line of wooden towers. So here we have female part of the palace, and this tower, the biggest tower in the palace, was for the Tsar's wife, for his second wife, Natalia Naryshkina, for our Russian Tsaritsa. It was so big because all the children before the age of 5 years lived together with Tsaritsa, lived together with their mother, and later they left this tower and they start to live separately in other towers of this big wooden palace. All in all, our Tsar Alexis, as I said, had 16 kids, 6 boys and 10 girls. But his 5 elder sons from his first marriage with Maria Ilyinishna Miloslavskaya, from this first marriage, all of them were very sick since their childhood. That's why 3 of his sons died before the age of 18 during the life of their father. And the next ruler of Russia after the death of Tsar Alexis became his 3rd son, Fedor Alexeyevich, Fedor the Third. He became the next Tsar. He attended the throne when he was only 14 years old, and he ruled only for 6 years. He was very sick. For 6 years, he ruled. For 6 years, he ruled our country, and then he died without an heir. He had no sons, he had no daughters. That's why he, after his death, was a very big problem. Was a very big problem with the heritage of the throne. There were only two possible heirs: Tsar Ivan and Tsar Peter. Peter, the sixth, the youngest son. So now we can continue. So Peter, the youngest son of Tsar Alexis, he was only 10 years old, and Ivan, the fifth son of Tsar Alexis, he was 16 years old. Of course, according to the rules, the next Tsar should be the eldest son, Ivan, but he was very sick. He had scurvy since his childhood, and also he had some problems with eyes. He had an eye disease. That's why he could not see correctly as a healthy people do it. That's why the Boyarskaya Duma, the royal council, the council of boyars, decided to make a new Tsar, Peter, healthy boy, the youngest son of Tsar Alexis. But he, of course, could not rule himself. The regent should be, the new regent of our Russian Tsar should become his mother, Natalia Naryshkina. That was not very pleasant fact for the relatives of first wife of Tsar Alexis, for the relatives of Maria Miloslavskaya. That's why the relatives of Maria Miloslavskaya, of first wife of Tsar Alexis, her relatives organized in Moscow rebellion. They organized rebellion of 1682, and after that rebellion, the new rulers of Russia were claimed two people simultaneously. We had two Tsars simultaneously, Ivan and Peter. Especially for them was made this throne with two seats. Of course, for usual monarchs, we have throne only with one seat. That was throne for two Tsars, for Ivan and Peter. And the new regent of Russia, while Ivan and Peter were too young and could not rule, became their elder sister, Sophia, the daughter of Tsar Alexis. She became to rule our country, and she ruled for 7 years. During that 7 years, Peter the Great and his mother, Natalia Naryshkina, spent in Moscow not very many time, because they had very difficult, not very good relationships with Sophia. That's why Peter the Great, here we can see a portrait of Peter the Great when he's only 10 years old. So they left, Peter and his mother left Moscow, and then they lived mainly in suburban area, in summer residences, in Izmailovo, in Preobrazhenskoye, in village Vorobyovo, and here in Kolomenskoye. In Moscow, they spent only winter and spring, summer, and autumn. They spent in suburban area. And here in Kolomenskoye, our Tsar Peter the Great started his military trains, especially for young Tsar. Was created a toy regiment. What is the toy regiment? That was a regiment which consisted of several, at first of several hundreds of people, as teenagers, as well adult people, as well noble and usual people. And at first that was just a game of war for a young Tsar. But later wooden weapons were changed for a real weapon, and that toy regiment became to make real military trains. And later it was divided to two regiments, Преображенский and Семеновский regiment, and these two regiments became first regiments of our Russian regular army, first regiments of our Russian Guardi. And the trains of that regiments were near Kolomenskoye in these great open fields. Also, on the water of the Moscow River, Peter the Great sailed here on his famous boat Saint Nicholas. That boat he found when he was only 16 years old, and he liked to sail this boat so much that later he ordered to build even a real toy navy on Pleshevo Lake. It is nearly 300 kilometers to the north from Moscow. And later, Peter the Great became really sick by a sea, and he ordered to build our Russian navy, our real Russian military navy. That was due to that small boat, which have preserved till nowadays. And I now will show you the image of this boat. So the image of this board we can see here. That is board which today we have in St. Petersburg in a museum, Russian Navy Military Museum. Here it is. This board has nearly 300 years of history, and Peter the Great called it the grandfather of our Russian Navy, because in a pre-Petrine epoch we had no any big ships which could sail the sea, and this boat led Peter the Great to born a dream. From this boat start his great dream, a dream about the sea. So all these things happened here in Kolomenskoye. Also near this wooden palace of his father, near the palace of Tsar Alexis, was here, yes, inside of the palace you can see the front chamber of this palace, was this huge tree. It's an ancient oak. It has approximately 600 years old. It is the eldest tree in Moscow, and on the shadow of this tree, Peter the Great, according to the legend, learned how to write. We have no any exact written sources about this, but this legend still preserves in Kolomenskoye till nowadays. Later, when Peter the Great became an adult man, he practically all his life spent in different military campaigns. And of course, he visited Kolomenskoye not very often. Now I will show you a portrait of Peter the Great to see him. Main part of his portraits are in this. You can see him like a knight in this plate armor, or like a soldier in this our Russian military uniform of the 18th century. So practically all his life, Peter the Great spent in different military campaigns, and he returned to Kolomenskoye, here to this palace, of course, not very often, but he liked this place very much. He celebrated here his military victories. He celebrated here the coronation of his second wife, the coronation of Catherine I. And also he ordered, of course, to repair and to care this palace. But he transferred the capital of Russia from Moscow to St. Petersburg. That's why our Russian Tsar and emperors, Peter the Great was the first emperor of Russia, they start to live not in Moscow, they start to live in St. Petersburg. That's why that was not very comfortable to them to arrive here from St. Petersburg to Moscow in Kolomenskoye, in this summer palace. That's why this palace became empty. They practically stopped to visit it. And in the middle of the 18th century, this palace started to rot. That's why this wooden palace was deconstructed by the order of our empress Catherine the Great. But she ordered before the deconstruction to make detailed plans of this palace. That's why today this palace was rebuilt in Kolomenskoye. We can see its exact copy due to these detailed plans. Of course, today Kolomenskoye is not the royal residence. It is a museum. Our museum was founded here in 1923, in the beginning of the 20th century, by this man. His name was Peter, but he was not Peter the Great. His name was Pетr Барановский. He was a famous Russian architect and restorator. Here we can see his photos. Peter Барановский, the first director and the founder of our museum. He founded many other museums, but he was the first man in Russia who started to secure the monuments of ancient Russian architecture. And due to him, we have today in Kolomenskoye this small wooden house, the house of Peter the Great, the only house of Peter the Great in Moscow. It was transported here from Arkhangельsk. At first, it was built not here. This wooden house at first was built in the city of Arkhangельsk. Now I will show you where it is. Here we can see Kolomenskoye, Moscow, satellite map of Moscow, and approximately 1,000 kilometers to the north from Moscow, we have this city on the coast of White Sea, Arkhangельsk, the main seaport of Russia in the 17th and in the beginning of the 18th centuries. And here in delta of the river North Двина, Северная Двина, near this island, it is called Linsky Island. On a small sand island, which was called the island of St. Mark, was built that wooden house near this Novodvinskaya fortress. That fortress should secure the farvater of North Двина to prevent the Swedish military ships from attacking Arkhangельsk. And Peter the Great lived in that house on the island of St. Mark for only 80 days. He looked at the constructing of Novodvinskaya fortress. He planned his military campaign against Swedish fortress Noteburg, and later he left that house. He started his military campaign against Sweden, the campaign of 1702, and that house was left on that island of Saint Mark. If we can, we will look at the map. There is no island of Saint Mark. Why? Because that was too small sand island, which terribly suffered from floods. And in 1710, in the year 1710, after a terrible flood, officers of this Novodvinskaya fortress, decided to transport that house from that flooded island to the bank of Двина River near the fortress. In that house started to live several soldiers of this fortress, and later, in the beginning of the 19th century, that fortress was abolished, and the garrison from here was transported to another place, and the house of Peter the Great again became empty. For 13 years, it was standing empty, but later it was transported from Novodvinskaya fortress to the central part of Arkhangelsk, here to the Peter's Park. And in our presentation, here we have several photos. It is, yes, the map, the plan of Novodvinskaya fortress, and here we have the photo, pre-revolutionary photo made in the beginning of the 20th century, 1908. Here we can see in this old photo that house of Peter the Great on the bank of the river North Двина in Arkhangelsk. That was one of the main tourist attractions in that north city. But after the revolution of 1917, after the revolution of 1917, after the beginning of the communistic regime in our country, communists started a campaign of extermination of the monuments which were linked with the monarchistic regime. And the administration of Arkhangelsk, new communist administration of Arkhangelsk, in 1930 decided that this house of Peter the Great is a monument of monarchistic regime, and they decided to destroy it. But in this situation intervened our first director, Petr Dmitrievich Baranovsky, and Baranovsky convinced the administration of Arkhangelsk not to destroy this house, but to transport it from Arkhangelsk to our museum, to Museum Kolomenskoye. So in 1938, it was transported to our museum. For 2 years, it was restored, and after that, it opened its doors for our guests. Now you can see it in Moscow in our museum. How was possible to transport this house? It was built in a traditional Russian technique of wooden architecture. The cap groove, we can name it in English. In Russian, it is srub в чашу. So the cap groove, it was built from wooden logs. In each wooden log, we made this groove in a form of a cap. That's why the logs laid in these grooves one on another, and all the construction were built like a Lego constructor, like a Lego toy for kids. That's why it was very easy to construct and deconstruct it, and it was easily transported to Moscow due to this traditional Russian, very ancient technique of a construction of different wooden buildings. Here we can see the element of this cap groove of our wooden log houses. And now in this photo, we can see several ancient things of the beginning of 18th century. These caps are near traditional Russian plates and European bottles, because caps and glass bottles are not a traditional Russian dishes. They were borrowed from Western Europe. In Russian tradition, we used these tin glasses, we used plates, we use several other types of the cups, but not, for example, glass bottles or cups like this. Also, here we can see traditional Russian table decorated by this wooden ornaments and these two capboards. Capboards made by Russian carpenter, but in a European style. Here we can see European elements in the exterior of these cupboards, European pictures on them, but they have no poles. That was special cupboards which were made specially for standing them on the benches. In Europe, people never made such kind of cupboards. They were standing not on the benches, on the floor. Of course, traditional Russian chests with these ornaments, the model of ship, Dvina, and another two chests. For example, this European chest. And now we can show you two videos which will tell you about another items of our museum, items made out of metal and ancient books which are in a collection of our museum. And we will know a bit more about our collection. Yes, now video about our books.
В собрании нашего музея хранится много уникальных книг, напечатанных при жизни Петра Великого, при его активном участии. И первая книга, про которую я хочу вам рассказать, это книга «Арифметика», напечатанная в Москве на печатном дворе в 1703 году. Учебник «Арифметика» составлен педагогом и математиком Леонтием Филипповичем Магнитским для обучения арифметики в школах математических и навигатских наук. Книгу украшает гравюра на меди мастера Михаила Корновского, на которой сверху изображен герб российского государства, двуглавый орел. Ниже изображены древнегреческие математики Архимед и Пифагор. Рядом с ними можно увидеть сундуки и мешки с товарами. Это символизирует то, что ведение коммерческих дел, торговли возможно только с знанием математики. И тут же можно увидеть изображение царицы арифметики, которая восседает на троне, как царица всех наук. Навигационный атлас, который был издан в Амстердаме в 1703 году. На гравюре, которая помещена в начале издания, изображен Петр I в образе будущего императора России. Атлас напечатан в 1703 году, Россия становится империей только в 1721 году. Но ему предрекали великое будущее и в аллегорическом таком окружении давали установку на будущее императорство. В книге можно увидеть проект Волго-Донского канала, который не был осуществлен из-за Северной войны. и был сооружен только в 1952 году. В картографических съемках Петр I принимал личное участие. Книга «Новейшие основания и практика артиллерии» напечатана в Москве в 1710 году. В книге можно увидеть гравюру, на которой сверху изображен бог войны Марс, крепость, осаждаемую турками, и воина, который мортирами защищается от нападения. Книга составлена таким образом, что чертежи подклеены к обрезу таким образом, что можно одновременно развернуть чертеж и прочитать его описание в тексте. Это делалось в книгах петровского времени именно для того, чтобы можно было практически использовать это наставление. Книга «Юность и честное зерцало» или «Показания к житейскому обхождению» издана в Москве в 1723 году. Это 4-е издание. Первое издание вышло в 1717 году. Книга состоит из 2 частей. В первой части рассказывается о введении гражданского шрифта и арабских цифр. Во второй части находится, собственно, зерцало или правила поведения молодых людей и девушек в обществе. Книга пользовалась очень большой популярностью до конца XIX века. Книга «География генеральная» напечатана в Москве в 1718 году. Автором книги является европейский ученый Бернгард Варениус. На гравюре, которая украшает это издание, здесь можно увидеть беседующих на берегу моря ученых Коперника, Тихо Бравия и Птолемея. Гравюра выполнена в мастерской Московского печатного двора под управлением Ивана Зубова. Книга о управлении Адмиралтейства и верфи напечатана в Санкт-Петербурге в 1724 году. Регламент лично составлен Петром I. Здесь даются инструкции и указываются все должностные обязанности чинов и служб Адмиралтейства. Эти и другие экспонаты вы можете увидеть на выставках и экспозициях нашего музея, посетив деревянный дворец царя Алексея Михайловича, домик Петра I, перевезенный с Белого моря, и голландский домик, который является реконструкцией домика в Заандаме, в котором Петр I жил в 1697 году.
Сегодня я познакомлю вас с предметами, имеющими отношение к Петру Великому, вещи эпохи Петра I. Хочу сразу оговориться, личных предметов мемориальных, к сожалению, у меня в коллекции нет, но предметы, современники Петра, представлены в нашем собрании и довольно разнообразны в большом количестве. Я начну вот с этого предмета. Пушка на вертлюге, вот это приспособление называется вертлюга, вставлялась в борт гребного судна. Такие пушки использовали при абордаже и во время десантных операций, во время высадки на берег. Лили эти пушки в Оланце, город Оланец. Там были чугунолитейные заводы, на которых вот подобные артиллерийские орудия и изготовляли. Следующий предмет, который я хочу вам показать, сабля начала XVIII века, так называемая пандурская сабля. Такими саблями были вооружены конники, конная стража, которая охраняла южные рубежи Московского царства, а позже Российской империи. В конце 17 века Петр I ездил за рубеж, побывал в Германии, в Англии. Мы знаем, что с петровских времен как раз и мода на многое западное стала у нас в России утверждаться. И вот к таким предметам относится вот такая серебряная кружка конца 17 века, до появления медалей и орденов, которыми награждали отличившихся в бою. Одно время роль орденов выполняли и вот такие питейные дорогие кружки. В частности, Шереметьево за взятие Шлиссельбурга Петр I наградил вот такой кружкой. И подобная вещь хранится в нашей коллекции, в нашем музее. Мощный, тяжелый, отлитый из латуни канделябр настольный. Ну, вы знаете, что освещение в то время сильно отличалось от теперешнего. То есть, если человек хотел почитать книгу, рассмотреть карту или написать какое-то письмо, рядом с собой ставил вот этот канделябр, зажигал свечи. Причем хочу обратить внимание, что и в быту того времени предмет был очень дорогим, потому что сразу зажечь 6 свечей не каждый мог себе позволить, потому что свечи, особенно восковые, были очень и очень дорогими в быту, в обиходе предметами. Это оконница 17 века, оконница слюдяная. Дело в том, что стекла тогда еще в обиходе не было. И в качестве стекла как раз вот работала слюда. И вот такой рисунок слюдяной появлялся. Собственно, чем вызвано вот такое обилие металлических деталей? Дело в том, что слюды вот такого формата большого практически в природе не встречаются. Брали небольшие кусочки слюды, слюду эту сшивали довольно грубо, толстыми суровыми нитками. И чтобы картинку сделать на выходе поэстетичней, тонкие полосы жести покрывали оловом, то есть лудили, как тогда говорили. Делалось это с двумя целями. Цель первая. Во-первых, олово предохраняло предмет от ржавчины, а во-вторых, олово еще и эстетическую нагрузку несло. Со стороны могло показаться, что вот эти полоски, они покрыты серебром. На самом деле, конечно, не серебром, а оловом. Вот такой интересный эффект. В холодное время года слюдяные оконницы закрывали толстым куском войлока, чтобы слюда не пропускала холод в помещение. Соответственно, в помещении становилось менее комфортно, довольно неуютно, становилось просто темно. А для этой цели были всевозможные осветительные приборы, с одним из которых мы не так давно с вами познакомились. Я познакомил вас с несколькими предметами конца 17-го, начала 18 веков, предметами, которые широко бытовали в петровское время. А в заключение рассказа мне хочется всех вас пригласить в Домик Петра, где у нас великолепная экспозиция, которая знакомит с предметами, в частности, предметами из металла. И там вы увидите гораздо разнообразнее вещи из металла, гораздо более интересные. Так что ждем вас в гости в Домике Петра в Коломенском. Thank you.